Okay, this is Carrie. It looks like everybody is on board. We can go ahead. I'd like to call this meeting to order. And the first item we have is to approve the agenda. So if somebody will make a motion to do that.
I would make a motion that we approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we approve the agenda as written. Any discussion on that? If none, all those in favor of the motion, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
And that motion carries. We'll go right into our information items report. First thing we have on there is our financial update. And we'll turn it over right now to our Chief Financial and Operations Officer, Lisa Howell. So go ahead.
Lisa, you're still on mute.
You're on mute, Lisa.
You're going to have to unmute.
Let's start again. Sorry. Good afternoon, everybody. I will be working in coordination with our clerk of the board. I have a document, a PowerPoint that I'm going to be going through. And hopefully Kelly will be able to load it, and you as the board and anybody also that's participating out in the field will be able to follow along with me.
Lisa, do you want us to ask questions as you go along, or do you want to wait and hold until you're through?
Thank you, Chair Kelly. I'd actually prefer if we could wait until the end. I have a fair amount of content to share, and I'm hoping that I've anticipated, a good number of questions, and that the content will cover it as I go through the presentation.
Okay, we'll hold them till we get through. Thank you.
Okay. The other things I just want to state out loud also that this is a budget workshop, and that anything that's presented here by myself and our superintendent will be posted online tomorrow morning under the financial section of our district website, which is lposd.org. And then I wanted to talk about the timeline that's statutorily required for school districts to adopt their budget annually. So we have to first notify the county clerk by April 30th of our budget hearing date. And we have to adopt our budget on or before June 30th of 2020. There also are public noticing requirements that have to be 2 weeks apart. And so if I were to delineate what we think the budget timeline is for you as the elected officials that must adopt the budget, today would be the first workshop where myself and the superintendent, I'm giving you, to the best of my ability, financial overview, and then the superintendent will follow with some recommendations to balance our budget for fiscal year 2021. So we're talking about July 1st, 2020 to June 30th of 2021, which is called fiscal year 21. And then we anticipate that you as board members will have questions for myself and the superintendent, or things to further research. And that we would come back to you for a second workshop on April 28th, which is the regularly scheduled second meeting in April. And that by the May 12th meeting, things would be finalized, because in order to meet the noticing requirements and do all of the administrative work to actually get the budget into our accounting software, takes weeks to do, and between parts of my team. So Kelly, I'm ready to start with the PowerPoint. Is it? I'm not clear. Is it posted now for people to see?
Yes, Lisa.
Yes, it is.
I can't see it. So The PowerPoint has page numbers at the bottom right corner. So I've just covered page 1. So now I'm going to move on to page 2 that says fiscal year June 30th, 2020 projection. And so the first thing that we need to do is to determine what our fund balance or cash on hand, the reserve monies, whatever you want to call it, will be at the end of this fiscal year. So as of June 30th, 2020. And this shows you that we started the fiscal year with $4,420,000 in reserves. We have a board policy that we transfer $100,000, and we've actually doubled up on that for now several consecutive years to strategically rebuild our reserve amount. We also last year in May, we learned that some federal, what are called federal forest dollars would be appropriated for the final time. And we as a district decided we would just, we had finished our budgeting process, that we would roll those money into reserves. So we contributed $320,000 into the general fund reserves this year. And then on March 27th, our governor issued 9 months into the fiscal year, 1% holdback. We're anticipating that that's a loss of budgeted revenue of $235,000. The bigger piece for us is potentially, or so far, due to the closure, the soft close of our school facilities where instruction is being delivered online. The way pupil transportation is funded in Idaho, it's separate and distinct from all of the rest of the what's called the foundation funding formula. And we are anticipating a loss of that reimbursement, which would come to us or flow to us in October of 2020 of $573,000. And that's because our bus drivers, mechanics, the pupil support staff, transportation staff are in place. And as far as we've learned so far, because they're not driving, we will not be reimbursed for their salaries. So that's a swing negatively of $573,000. We last Thursday furloughed 7% of our non-benefited classified staff, and that in terms of salaries saves $94,000. We are also we participate in the USDA's breakfast and lunch program, and because of the soft closure of facilities, we are paid based on the number of meals we are serving, and we are serving free lunch to anybody 18 or under at 4 facilities, but we project a loss of $87,500 due to the soft closure of facilities. And then we've made some other program modifications that will save us in net about $26,000. So that means that we think we'll end our fiscal year, this fiscal year, June 30th, 2020, with $3,964,000, which taps into our reserves of just over $500,000, $555,000, or 10% of our reserves. But if we now move on to page 3, I'm sure you're aware that there are different pots of federal monies that are being appropriated. And the one I want to talk about is the CARES Act. And we have been given a rough estimate of, now it's 81% of our Title I current year appropriation. That would flow about $600,000 to the school district. The timing of that is not clear. The higher ed money has been released, and the K-12 money, I think, is coming second. So it may come in this fiscal year. And then if we, from page 2, offset, then what we've dipped into our reserves of $550,000, we actually, at the end of this fiscal year, if the $600,000 or the CARES money flows to us, we would have just a very small actual gain in our fund balance of $44,000. So we'd end the year, I'm projecting, at about 12% of our general fund annual revenues, based on what I'm projecting our fiscal year 2021 budgets, general fund budget's going to be, which I think is going to be just around $37 million. We do have a board policy that states our goal in our general fund balance reserves is 15%. So this would be 3% shy of that. Then if I move on to page 4, there are other factors that I would like to enumerate for you. The first is that we are in the first of a 2-year maintenance and operation levy that was passed in March of 2009. And it represents 35% of our general fund revenue. So I've done a little bit of research because, 2/3 of our general fund revenue, by and large, comes from the state appropriation annually, and then now 35% comes from this property tax levy. And property taxes are due in Idaho on June 15th of 2020. I've reached out to Cheryl Peel, who is the Bonner County Treasurer, to ask, has there been any dialogue or any instruction to the county clerks that payment date would be extended? And the answer is no, but things change all the time, reach back out to me. And then I've also reached out to a couple of our Idaho banking contacts to ask on the mortgage side, where on the residential side, if you're escrowing for your property tax payments, you're escrowing monthly, but if you're not making the mortgage payment, have the banks received any state directive that the payment would, how would they make the payment if they have insufficient funds, which normally, if you're short a little, then you go back to the holder of the mortgage and say, you owe whatever, a couple $100 or whatever it is to be able to pay the property taxes. I might not have the terminology right. The default rate in paying your property taxes in our county hovers around 6%. At the height of the 2009 recession, it went up, I think it was another percent, a little more than a percentage. But if properties are foreclosed on, property taxes must be paid plus interest and penalties due. So in terms of levying property taxes, it could be more of a timing issue when the payment actually comes in on the dollars that we're levying. And those that are in arrears, the interest and penalties, from the past experience living through the Great Recession, those more than offset the monies that we were levying. Then we have about $4 million currently that float through us through the federal title grant programs, and the federal grant cycle is not concurrent with our fiscal year cycle. And so we will probably receive an estimate, and I emphasize an estimate, in late April on those appropriations. Then they refine that generally in late August, and then we receive a final appropriation in September, sometimes even October. Do know that our what are called our free and reduced numbers, a measure of poverty in our district, is dropping significantly, and we anticipate that for that reason alone, the drop in free and reduced numbers, that our federal appropriation will drop in the Title I, the Title II programs, not the special ed programs, because that's more based on actually the student count of the special ed population. And then the state legislature finished their work in late March of this year, and we are able to project what our increase over the current appropriation is, and based on that adopted appropriation, and that's an additional $920,000 to our district compared to this year, before the 1% holdback. We've also projected flat enrollment, and I'll elaborate on that a little more at the end of the presentation. And then the biggest item here to discuss is there's definitely probably some dialogue at the state level of next year having some kind of holdback that would affect all agency budgets. The state does have the legislature has the ability, and probably the governor also, to declare a statewide financial emergency. There are also provisions in our board policy that would, we haven't met them, that would allow a district to declare a financial emergency, which would be in place for a year. But we're just, when Governor Otter was in place, and he had signaled that districts should budget a 4% holdback, which did not come to fruition in the Great Recession. And here we're just hopefully being conservative and estimating and bringing before you a potential 5% holdback, which would be $1.2 million for our school district lost revenue next year. So then if I move on to page 5, it's bringing together some of the information I've presented so far. It's just looking at our current adopted budget and all positions that are in place as of budgeted positions as of April of 2020, and comparing present to fiscal year 2021, what we would need and other factors to balance the budget. So I've discussed the first item, the appropriation on the state level of bringing in an additional $920,000. I've discussed the second line, a potential holdback of 5%. It could be less, it could be significantly more, $1.2 million. For those of you that have been following the school district, in September of 2019, we had slightly over projected our enrollment in the budgeting process in May of 2019, and that cost us $217,000. We also have deployed mostly last September, but a few positions after September of 2019, what we call contingency funded positions to deal with class sizes or a particular area of say, of special ed in a school. We've also have not generated as much in our Medicaid billing through our special ed students as we had anticipated and budgeted. That would be a loss of about $70,000. We have operational expenditures that will increase. For example, we just received our renewal premium for our liability insurance yesterday that increases the cost by about $20,000. It's that type of thing I'm talking about with operations. Then we always have attrition and retirement of teachers, and bringing in, if we compare an entry-level teacher versus a top attainable teacher, we're just conservatively saying that there'd be 5 of those positions, which would capture about $181,000. We as a school district participate with the statewide insurance plan for our health and dental coverage, and working with our insurance agent in January. And I should have mentioned this at the outset, this budgeting process started literally last fall with tracking the state's revenues and has been occurring since then. And we put a sort of a placeholder increase of 12%. We actually learned this morning that that it's just around 9%, and it would be my recommendation to our board that we follow what we've done now for several fiscal years, is that if we've overestimated the cost, that we essentially kind of bank that cost savings and attribute, and we would use that to offset a health insurance premium increase for fiscal year 22. And so that would be about $114,000. And then just working with what the state appropriation is for all of our different salary matrices, and there are 4. To align with the state's average salary increase and the affiliated payroll taxes that go with that, that's another $900,000. So at the bottom where it says shoe cut to balance, that means just shy of $2 million, $1.9 million in order to balance our budget for fiscal year 2021. Then there's some other significant things that you should know. Contained in this is $130,000 of what we call contingency dollars that we generally deploy in staffing in September after the first week of school, where we see what class sizes are like or what other specific needs there are. It also includes an enrollment buffer of $200,000. So blended, that's $330,000 worth of, call it what you want, contingency money. It's not expended. It's to be deployed as needs arise during the fiscal year. And then there are 2 other things that are pretty separate and distinct for fiscal year 2021. The Public Retirement System of Idaho offers only K-12 employees something called a sick leave benefit, and that part of the Percy, and it's a separate fund in Percy, and has performed very well, and they've actually put on hiatus and it's an employer only tax for all of the fiscal year. Now, we'll see what happens with the markets, but for us, that's $264,000. And when we originally built the levy that we are currently in and expires June 30th of 2021, we built it on a rate. And this is kind of hard to describe, but what I want to share is that between the first fiscal year and the second fiscal year of this levy, there will be $327,000 that will not be expended. So those 2 items, the Percy sick leave hiatus and the carry forward money from the levy, is $591,000. And add to it the recommendation I'm making here tonight, that given that our health insurance premium is coming in lower than we put a placeholder, that's another $114,000. So that we could call it deferred revenue, whatever term resonates with you. It would mean when we started our budgeting process for fiscal year 2022, we would essentially have $705,000 in our reserve fund that could help balance the 2022 budget. And this is then the beginning of our indefinite term supplemental levy, which is a fixed dollar amount. So then if I move on to page 6, now I'm just carrying forward, okay, a target of having to cut just under $2 million, $1,944,000, and some other recommendations that, I guess I can say I'm making. The first is that we defer purchasing 2 yellow buses next year, which we would capture $210,000. We still would be purchasing 3 yellow buses. If you recall, in the supplemental levy, we built in year 1 an additional purchase of 2 yellow buses, and then in year 2 an additional purchase of 2 yellow buses. And then I would also recommend that we put on hiatus contributing to our general fund reserve. Again, we contributed $200,000 this year. And also that we put on hiatus contributing to our plant fund, another $200,000. We had contributed $200,000 this year. And then we would tap into our general fund reserves, which I started this presentation with, for $590,000, which would mean what I'm trying to do is capture the 5% holdback, the $1.2 million that we're anticipating. And of course, if the holdback doesn't come to fruition, then these recommendations would change. Or if it's something less, then we could revisit this, or if it's something more, then we certainly need to revisit it. So that would bring us to a general fund balance at the end of fiscal year 21 to $3,874,000, or about 10.5% of our operational general fund operational budget. And then if I move on to page 7, and this is my last slide, there are things that are still pending. I mentioned that we have structured this budget so far on flat enrollment. There is a provision in Idaho Code, and it's 33-1003. And it says that if you have a decrease in average daily attendance in your first week in your first reporting period, which is the first 9 weeks of school, that you, compared to the prior year, that you are what's called protected to 3% of that. So that would mean 3% of the 3% protection means we would lose $562,000, reminding you that we have a budget buffer for enrollment of $200,000. So we could potentially lose, before we were protected, another $362,000 that's not part of the presentation so far. Then I've talked about the health insurance work. We do have a long-standing health insurance committee, and now that the premium was released today, the committee will start. We've met with our insurance agents, I guess it was late February, and now we will work as a committee to see if there are modifications to the policy that would capture some reduced costs, because the school district offers single party health insurance, but many carry their spouses and their families, and a 9% increase is certainly a notable increase to the health insurance costs of families, above and beyond just the school district. And then I wanted to just point out that there's a pretty big difference between the CARES federal package and what in 2009 was federally appropriated. The first, in 2009, there was something called the American Recovery and Investment Act, and that affected all public agencies, so cities and counties and school districts, and that was for 2 years. And then that was followed by something called stimulus dollars in the 3rd year that was only for K-12. And I shared earlier that right now in the CARES Act, we're anticipating around $600,000 in additional federal revenue. But I can share that now, a little more than a decade, we were receiving well over, I think it was about $1.2 million per year for 3 years. And that, so the CARES Act, in terms of money that's flowing to the public school districts in the country, is very different than the ARA dollars and the stimulus dollars. Significantly less money. And then we have annually, we are required by law to adopt a negotiated agreement with our teachers, and generally we start that negotiating process right now. We have not had our first meeting, but contracts are required by Idaho code to be issued, and we concurrently with this budget workshop process, I'm assuming we'll start meeting with our teachers union. Then the last two are very sort of self-evident, that trying to sit here in my position and give you a financial overview, given what's the unknown variables at the state level and at the federal level, is the best work I can present on April 14th, but expect, please, that things will change rapidly. As a district, we've always tried to be very conservative and mindful of keeping our reserves and deploying them when they're needed. And this has worked for us in the past, and this is why there is a recommendation to dip into our reserves to balance the budget for fiscal year 21 at this juncture. And those are my remarks that I have prepared.
Thank you very much, Lisa. It was a very good presentation. What I'd like to do is just go around to each board member and briefly see if you have any questions that Lisa can answer for us before we hear from the superintendent. So why don't we just start with Geraldine? Do you have any questions for Lisa?
Sure. And I think you said this on page 5, we were going through the kind of the projected revenue loss change. At the very bottom, you talked about the Percy sick leave and the 2-year levy carry forward and the possible change in health insurance. Rather than the 12%, it might be 9%. And those added up to 705,000, right?
Correct.
So why is that amount not just factored into that cut balance of one?
Because that's not my recommendation. My recommendation is, because we have a flat supplemental levy that expires, and then our indefinite term supplemental levy starts July 1st of 2021, that we need to be prepared not only this fiscal year, but for next fiscal year, to have sufficient reserves to balance a budget.
So you're just wanting to roll that forward to
Exactly.
the whole next budget cycle, and then work on getting this 1.9 million down. Okay. I was
Yes.
just trying to understand why we wouldn't use that now, but looking forward with caution. Okay.
Thank you. Anything else, Geraldine?
No.
Okay, let's move on to Lonnie. Do you have any questions for Lisa this time?
Yes. On the bus acquisition, holding off on 2 of them, was there? Did you say that? How many total did we plan on acquiring? I guess is the easiest way to ask that question.
We planned on acquiring originally in fiscal year 2021 5 buses.
Okay.
And now we will, if this comes to fruition, we would
potentially get 3 instead of 5.
No, we would be able to buy 3. And what this does is now 5 years clicking forward in the fiscal cycle, then the way buses are funded in the state is there is a 10-year depreciation.
Yeah.
And then we pick up about 30% of every bus's costs on top of that. But
Okay.
so we are pushing things forward a year. You know, you need to cut spending in this type of situation, and capital expenditures, which we have precious few capital expenditures. This is our recommendation.
Okay.
Can I piggyback a question on Lonnie's about the buses? You mentioned that it was part of the levy. What did you mean by that? I don't know that. Was it something on the ballot that we don't have option to change, or?
No, it was just when we were configuring the levy in October and November of 2018.
Yeah.
And we arrived at the levy rate that we wanted to bring before the voters. We included a list of,
Here's what we're buying. Or
right, here's what we're
the-
buying.
Yeah.
And we said, okay,
Here's the amount.
in the 2-year levy, we're hoping we would be able to buy 4 buses, but of course it wasn't a line item levy
Okay.
whatsoever.
Yeah.
It's
Right. So we have the discretion.
right. We have a full legal discretion to not purchase 2 buses.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lonnie. Any other questions for you?
No, thank you.
Okay, Gary, how about you? You have any questions for Lisa?
Yes, a couple. First of all, I'd like to echo what Geraldine brought up. That $710,000 of potential savings on the Percy and the general fund contributions, 2-year carryover. I mean, I think we ought to include that in our projection. I mean, if we're prepared to spend our reserves, I think in our projection, we ought to include our savings. Second, the 5% potential state holdback, on what basis are we speculating on that number? Has that come from the Department of Ed or the governor's office, or on what basis are we using that number?
So on the first point, I guess, Trustee, I would respectfully disagree that using this potential $705,000 to balance fiscal year 2021's budget only makes the school districts and the board's job next year at this time that much more difficult. And that it has worked in the favor of the school district, just like the federal forest dollars that I mentioned on page 2 of this presentation. That's another $120,000 that we made a decision. Oh, well, we could use that and just put it in the reserves. And here's an example of how we can use those dollars. On your second point, there definitely has been discussion of a potential holdback for 2021. We do anticipate that the executive branch of our government will be more forthcoming with that, and we feel comfortable in that, that will be forthcoming.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Gary, any other questions you want to ask?
No other questions for me.
Pearlie, how about you? Do you have any questions for Lisa?
No, I think she's answered all of mine. Thank you.
Okay.
Carrie, you're muted.
Oh, I'm sorry. There are so many unknowns that we have that I think the conservative approach that Lisa's taken is really the right thing to do. There's so many unknowns that we have as far as what the effect long term is going to be with this virus. Obviously, next year, tax coming in from sales taxes as well as income tax probably are going to be affected for at least a year, maybe longer than that. So I think it's wise to be cautious, and I think Lisa did a pretty good job doing that. Anyway, right now, why don't we just move on and talk to Tom about his recommendations on the budget. So go ahead, Tom.
All right. Thank you, Board Chair Kelly. I want to say thank you to Lisa working on this budget with me, along with Brian Smith and Andrew Murray, along with all the directors and the principals of each building. And so what I have, Kelly, I don't know, can you put that one slide up? So what I have is a basically potential adjustments, and I have them in some different categories. Let's just go to the second slide. And I know these are pretty broad categories, but what I've done is worked with all the directors and worked with the building principals and also the Teachers Association to come up with some areas where I feel that we can make some adjustments. And so I want to go through each one of these categories with you. And I know they're broad categories, giving some flexibility. One thing I'd like to point out is that Lisa's bottom number on her presentation was just a little over $744,000. And at the very bottom of my slide, we have a suggestion here. Is a little over $1 million in potential adjustments to some budgets. So I wanted to, again, be conservative and want to be prepared in any direction we need to move. So the first is we've looked at the district office and within administration, and we feel that though services may not look the same, and I want you to understand that anytime we're doing budget cuts, I don't want patrons to think that this is easy and that this is things that we didn't need. There's just when there's times when we have to make adjustments, things are going to look a little different. But we feel that most of these are the furthest away from the student in the classroom and will affect student learning the least. And that was our criteria, and I want you to know that. So district office administration, I'll give you some examples of what's in that $118,000. We have hired a new senior HR director. That position is now 32 hours a week instead of 40, so we've reduced some salaries there within the district office. We reduced $10,000 out of a superintendent's budget on communication. Teaching and learning, working with Andrew Murray, we took some consumables out. Not enough that is going to be affecting the instruction that's going to be happening, but we would tighten our belt in consumables that we would be purchasing at the elementary level and secondary level. We did hire a new principal at Northside Elementary, and there's some difference in salary between a veteran principal and a newer principal. And then, we did have an instructional coach that volunteered and chose to go back into the classroom. So again, that is where we're capturing that district in administration. In technology, working with Matt Brass, most of this, a lot of this saving is looking at our software that we're using, and is there other software out there that was more efficient, and we sharpened the pencil on the cost there. For one example would be the program we use to do our teacher evaluations. Actually, the state of Idaho, State Department of Education, went with a different program called Frontline, and we're going to move to Frontline because it is paid for us from the state, and that would save us, you know, a little over $13,000. So there's not any one big ticket item, but we looked at all the way through in which we could try to come up with these savings and cuts. We could, other thing, working with the tech department in some of our computer labs, Matt was being very efficient in the sense that he was preparing to do some upgrades in some of our computer labs. We've reduced that budget, so we won't upgrade as many machines, but we're still going to be operational, and we really shouldn't miss a beat there. So those are some things in technology. Special services, we had a individual who worked in special services who took a partial leave of absence, and we feel that we can provide the services and still absorb that cost. And also just had all the directors look at their budgets. We may not do as much professional development and training as we had in the past. That's also in special services there. The contingency category, contingency dollars are dollars that we hold until we know where we really need them in August or September. So for example, if we have a really big class size or a bubble that we need some more paraprofessional support at a certain building, we want to have that money available to be able to support that teacher, or if we needed to add another teacher at a certain building because we just missed the mark on enrollment. Those are the things that the contingency dollars are on. So we're going to take money off from what we spent last year on contingency dollars. I do want you to know that we're going to recoup that as a savings for now, but we will have those dollars to reallocate, but they may go to a different building, to a different class level, depending upon where those needs are. Moving on down, we've got secondary schools, and on the secondary schools, there is no individual that will be, we're not reducing any teaching positions, but we are absorbing some of a few, again, leave of absences or resignations. So it was voluntary, and we are trying to be more efficient with staffing. We are taking some out of some supply budgets at some of the secondary schools, and some of those supplies are will just felt like that won't affect the instruction in the classroom. And then extracurricular activities, there's a small reduction in there, working with the activities directors in which we can adjust. So, you know, one thing that's interesting is that the reason this number is over the 744,000 is this isn't a cut, but it could be a gain. And so when we are working to increase student enrollment at our alternative high school, and when we do that, that could capture more funds coming in from the state to support them. So that's an area which is calculated into the secondary schools. Elementary schools, again, and I appreciate the work I've done with Brian Smith on this. We kind of wanted to reset the support that we're giving with paraprofessionals at each of our elementary schools. So what we did was we came up with an equitable formula to give each building X number of hours of support based off of their enrollment. And we feel that this is something that needed to happen anyway. So it's a savings of around 63,000. But like I said, is we may be needing some of that back in the fall, but I want to put it where it's needed. And if we don't readjust right now, what happens is we may keep para support where we don't need it, and it's harder to move in August and September. So that's where we are there. Lisa kind of touched on insurance. we estimated a little bit that the cost of the insurance would come in a little higher than it did. And then I'm also proposing that Lisa had on her slide that we had some proposed state salary money coming in. And I'm asking to put a hold on some of that because I think it's important that we provide the best education possible. And as always, we will have a collaborative working relationship through negotiations with our teachers. But my recommendation is that we hold back some of those funds, and it may be part of that 5% holdback that we're anticipating. The other category are just some areas. We usually hire 3 temporary grounds people during the summer. We're going to hire 2 instead of 3. So we're going to recoup some savings there. Director of Maintenance, Matt Deal, said they can, make do with the 2 instead of the 3. So there's some adjustments there. On the other, also, we were planning on recouping some fuel savings in our transportation department so that's in the other category. And so that kind of gives you a rundown of where I feel confident that we can definitely balance the budget to that $744,000. And I know my list is more than that, but that gives some flexibility for some enrollment decisions to make, and then also put some funds back where we might need them come fall. So I'll open it up to questions.
Okay, we'll just go around again and see if anybody has any questions. Geraldine, do you have any?
I do. I don't mean to sound on the elementary schools. It was mostly para support.
Right. So I am not asking for any reduction in teachers at this time. Right. It is a restructure working with the building principals and working with the Teachers Association on just kind of one way is maybe hit the reset button on how many hours of para support we have in each building. And that's going to be a new base that we would use. And then as more support is needed, we'll put it in the right spot. And I think that is going to be a more efficient way to do it.
Okay. And then I just have 2 other quick comments. One, you're adding your insurance savings. Also, Lisa was adding that insurance savings as something to be held over in kind of a buffer for the next budget, which I just don't want to count it twice, but it's there. And then the other thing is, I guess I don't understand what you mean by hold on the state salary proposed budget and how that gains us 185 for this coming year.
Well, I would look at it this way, is that the recommendation that came, and again, things could change, but the recommendation that came from the governor's office was a 2% increase in salaries. And so what I'm saying is that working collaboratively like we always do, holding back some of that 2%.
I get
savings to keep teachers in front of students rather than maybe going with the recommendation.
Okay.
That's something that would still have to be decided. So again, that's why this is called a workshop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Lonnie, do you have any questions for the superintendent?
My question was going to be on that state salary stuff, so that clarified that for me.
Okay, thank you. Gary?
Yeah, I got a couple of questions, Tom. Okay,
Yeah.
When we make these adjustments, are we losing any of our current programs or any of our current services or any of our current class curriculum?
No. For example, at Sandpoint High School, we will be down 3 teaching sections, but those teaching sections do not eliminate any programs or opportunities per se for students. And two of the sections were voluntary resignation down to part-time anyway, so that was an easy 2 sections to recoup. And then there was another one that we had added back in last year, but no programs would be lost at all. And I was very, very careful of that.
Okay, then another question. In the last 2 legislative sessions, the legislature has budgeted additional monies for childhood literacy, K through 3.
Right.
And in the most recent session, they budgeted some extra monies for the high end of the salary ladder for our senior teachers. Are we going to be able to utilize those funds to do what they're intended for?
I think in Lisa's presentation, let's start with the career ladder and the addition of the 3rd rung. That appropriation, and Lisa, please chime in if I'm wrong, but that $902,000 of appropriation was the estimate of what we would get from collectively from Governor Little's proposal. On the early childhood literacy, we started using a lot of those funds. So there's 2 ways that we're going to use those funds. Number 1 is providing more opportunities for kindergarten. And 2, any student who is not reaching their benchmarks on the IRI reading indicator test in those grades, K1, 2, 3, must get so much extra support to get them up. So again, that's where we would be using the money with para support to help them. So yes, we do have a K3 literacy plan, and we use those dollars within the parameters of what they're set up to. But most of the focus is that early childhood literacy, getting them started in kindergarten.
Okay. So we are going to continue to support childhood literacy, at the higher level.
Absolutely.
And we will be able to reward, our most experienced teachers with a raise this year.
Well, that will be, negotiations have not started.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Yes, anything else, Gary?
No, that's all for me.
Okay, Pearlie, do you have any questions for the superintendent?
The nice thing about going last is all my questions get answered. So thank you.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I really go last, so I don't have any other questions either. Thanks, Tom, very much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
You might as well just go right into the update on the coronavirus disease and brief us on that.
Yeah, I just felt like it was fitting to keep this on the agenda each board meeting. We were all highly anticipating that Monday at the State Board of Education's special meeting, they were going to come out with the criteria of what it would take to open schools back up. They took that off the agenda Monday, and they have now put that on their agenda for their Thursday meeting. And that Thursday is at 8 a.m. and it's their regular State Board of Education meeting, and it's a very lengthy agenda looking at it. But two reasons they moved the agenda. Number 1, tomorrow, I believe at might be 10 a.m. I don't know if that's Mountain Time or if that is Pacific Time. Governor Little will be addressing on his recommendations for the stay at home order. And I think the State Board of Education wanted to wait until after he presented that before they came out. And I think they were also getting some more communication with the Director of Health and Welfare. And I wouldn't be surprised that the criteria is obviously going to be a health decision, not an educational decision in a community. And it's going to come down to, does your health district recommend that you're safe to open schools back up? So those are things. And then on the activity side, the Idaho High School Activities Association moved their decision and meeting to now Friday. So everybody moved it to kind of get in line with Governor Little's decision. So at this point in time, we know that State Board of Education, and this is what we're following as this district, is that we will continue distance learning for the end of our calendar year, or until there are certain criteria that could be met in our community. And we all, hold out hope for that. But again, we're not looking at that right now. We're going to continue educating students the best that we can with distant learning. But so that's kind of what's happened in that situation. To the board, I would like to just give you a message that I know there are you're going to read about other school boards who are going to go ahead right now, and they're going to, decide that they're going to close for the rest of the year. And I think my advice at this point in time is for us to hold tight, and more than likely that we are going to be doing distant learning for the rest of the school year. But if there's a chance that we could recoup even a week or 2 weeks with students, I feel that's a real positive way to close the school year and also to get the next school year started. But, we're not, like I said, that will be a health decision, not an educational decision. So that's kind of the update of where we are at this point in time. Do you have any questions about that? Any board members?
No, I want to thank you very much.
Sure.
Yeah, we're just going to have to wait and see as far as the school closure for the rest of the year. I realize that. Okay, well, let's move on. We have a first reading of a new policy, employees paid with federal funds and unexpected and extraordinary closures, with Lisa Hall's briefing us, please. Are you there?
Let's see. Yes, so this is a first reading, and this is actually a recommendation from the Idaho School Boards Association. The federal government, the Office of Management and Budget, on March 9th, issued pretty direct recommendations that if you are a school district that receives federal Department of Education funds, that you need to be consistent with your I'm quoting, consistent with your policies and procedures that apply uniformly to both federally financed and other activities. So, as you know, we have several federally funded educational grants, and there are many teachers and parapros that are tied to those grants, and we are required by law to complete what are called time and effort reporting, saying that, they are doing grant related work within the parameters of the federal grant. And this policy just says that we are treating the federally funded employees identical to our generally funded employees. And this provides us protection and allows us to continue to draw down the federal funds.
Okay, any questions from the board? And we'll see this next at our next meeting, the policy for adoption.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll go ahead and move on to action items. The first one being the consent agenda.
So I would make a motion that we approve the consent agenda.
I second that.
It's been moved and seconded that we approve the consent agenda. Is there any discussion from any board members on that? If not, we'll go ahead. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Are there any opposed? I'll ask that too. And there are no opposed, so that was passed on a unanimous decision. Next, we have a resolution 20-06 response to the COVID-19 emergency, and back to our superintendent.
Yeah. This is a resolution here, and I may defer to Clerk of the Board Fisher. Do you want to co-present this?
I can go ahead and do that.
Okay, thank you. Why don't so basically, and I'll let the Clerk of the Board Fisher kind of go over a little more in detail, but basically what we have is we're changing business and how we're doing business because of COVID-19, how we're meeting and how a brick and mortar school would work. And this kind of covers all of those policies. And then I will let Clerk of the Board Fisher add on to that. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
No, other than Trustee Pearlie Decker did point out one error. It was under the numbered items on page 3 under 7, superintendent was not spelled correctly. So I just asked that that be noted when the motion be made.
Trustee Lewis caught it also.
Yes.
Hey, nice going, guys.
Trustee Williams did not. Big shocker.
If you guys have any specific questions about this, I'd be happy to go over them one by one with you. Other than that, it just, under the whereas and the recital, it just talks about what the State Board of Ed has done, what the governor's done, the day that we closed school and made that decision as a board. So turning back over to Clerk Kelly, if you guys
It basically
have
outlines what we've done already in the last period of time. So there's really nothing new in this. It's just a little bit some of it's overcome by events, but we'll just see how it plays out. Any other questions on it?
I have one question for Clerk of the Board, Fisher. Is this language pretty much taken from this state resolution and then adapted to when we made our own changes, or did you draft this language from scratch?
this resolution was actually presented to all region superintendents and school districts. And I can share that many regional school districts are adopting a similar resolution.
Okay.
Just to fit their district specifically.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, if there are no further questions, I'll entertain a motion that we move to adopt this with the one correction there on the word superintendent and number 7 item on there.
So I would make a motion that we adopt resolution 20-06, response to COVID-19 emergency, with the noted correction in item 7.
Second that.
It's been moved and seconded that we adopt the resolution as stated. Why don't we have a roll call vote so we know? Could you give us that, please?
Okay. Yes. Roll call vote. Trustee Lewis.
Yes.
Trustee Supager.
Aye.
Trustee Williams.
Aye.
Trustee Decker.
Aye.
Trustee Kelly.
Yes. Thank you. And that is adopted on a unanimous vote. Now we're down to announcements. So Superintendent, do you have any announcements for us?
I think I've kind of given you an update already on the state workings. We are continuing. We had Andrew Murray and myself did have administrative meetings today with our principals. And again, I would just like to say that, when we start our meetings, we always go around and talk about positives. And it's just amazing the innovation and how hard our staff is working, reaching out to the families. Andrew, do you have anything you would like to add to that from the meeting? I put you on the spot there.
Just confirming that thank you to our entire staff for working so hard with families on remote learning options and what we can do via technology, what we can provide in hard packet. I think I just commend our staff. So thank you all for supporting us.
Last week, we had another pickup of materials and we had a very high turnout. So to me, that is very good data. Keep in mind, though, that the key word here is we are being very flexible and we'll be accommodating with any and every family. And so as our building administrators and our teachers are working with the families, you know, it's to the point that if we need to deliver materials, we've got principals and teachers who are delivering materials to people's porches. So it's anything and everything. So again, for any parents out there and students out there, please, if you have a need, reach out to your school because we're here to serve.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. That concludes our open session of the meeting today. I will entertain a motion to go into executive session at this time. And afterwards, I guess we'll have to switch our video and reassemble on a different line.
So I would make a motion to move into executive session as provided for in Idaho Code Title 74, Section 206, subsection 1F, to communicate with legal counsel for the public agency to discuss the legal ramifications of and legal options for pending litigation or controversies not yet being litigated but imminently likely to be litigated. The mere presence of legal counsel at an executive session does not satisfy this requirement.
I'll second that.
Okay. Oh, we go to executive session. Any discussion? If none, roll call vote, please.
Trustee Decker,
Aye.
Trustee Williams,
Aye.
Trustee Superger,
Aye.
Trustee Lewis,
Aye.
Trustee Kelly.
Aye, also. Okay, we will reconvene shortly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, hello.
Okay, we're back. Hello.
I
We're
think
back
we're
into regular.
We're waiting for
We don't-
Pearlie.
Waiting for Pearlie.
There he is.
Oh, fine. Okay, are you ready for a motion?
I am ready for a motion. We're now in regular session.
Okay, well, I would make a motion to authorize Superintendent Albertson to exercise a release agreement as presented in executive session.
I'll second that.
It's been moved and second that we approve the motion that we just heard. Any discussion? With no discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 And that motion is carried. Thank you all very much, and we will adjourn for tonight. Thank you.